Our subject tonight is a little understood and little known family of insects called flower flies, sometimes called hoverflies. It's the family Syrphidae, and they have a remarkably important place in the ecology of our region. And tonight we have the opportunity to learn something about these wonderful creatures that are literally under our noses, in our gardens, and in our natural places. And once Jeff has told you about these things, you'll be looking for them every time you see something hovering over a flower. I guarantee you that. So please welcome Jeff Mollenhauer and the flower flies of New Jersey.
All right, thank you all for coming tonight. This is a nice crowd. So tonight's topic will be flower flies, as Rich mentioned, also called hoverflies, the family Syrphidae. I'll start off by saying I am by no means an expert on flower flies. I got interested in flower flies for the first time. I don't have any formal training in the family Syrphidae, but I got interested in them 3 years ago when we started the BioBlitz, where we were surveying different areas around Gloucester County and posting things on iNaturalist. And that's when I first became aware of syrphids, of flower flies, because we were documenting so many of them on flowers. And before then, they're not something I was even aware of. So everything that I'll present to you tonight are species that I've seen in the last few years and learned more about gradually over that time. And as Rich mentioned, they're so easily overlooked that many of us see these. They're in our backyards. They're in a lot of the parks we go in. But yet there's not a lot known about them. Some of the species, the life history is very poorly known. We don't know a lot about the conservation status of many of the species. So it's just, and as we were documenting things in iNaturalist, in that year that we were doing the Big Year Eco Challenge, there were species that we documented in iNaturalist, one in particular that was the first record of that species on iNaturalist. Again, it's not something that I think of as probably extremely rare, as it is just not very well documented and overlooked, easily overlooked, because as we'll learn about these flies, you'll see why that they're easily overlooked. But they're beautiful flies with some amazing life history, which we'll get into tonight. So first off, to start off with, what is a flower fly? Flower flies are members of the phylum Arthropoda, so they're invertebrates with segmented bodies and limbs. They're part of the class Insecta, so they're insects. They're related to beetles, bees, ants, dragonflies, butterflies, moths. But they're specifically part of the order Diptera, or flies. So the order Diptera consists of like horseflies, hoverflies, crane flies, mosquitoes, midges. These are all things that essentially have a single pair of wings. So that's what's going to separate them from a lot of the other insects, things like dragonflies, butterflies, moths, wasps, bees. All of those have 4 wings. They have a forewing and a hind wing, whereas Diptera only have 2 wings. Amazingly, there's about 150,000 known species of Diptera, of flies, in the world. But it's estimated that there might be as many as 1 million. So that just goes to show, again, like how underdocumented some of the flies are in the world. Within the family Syrphidae, which is the flower flies or hoverflies, there's about 6,000 species that are known in the world. Of those, about 400 of the species are present within the northeastern part of North America. And they're found on every continent except for Antarctica. Within New Jersey, I could say by looking on iNaturalist at least, what's been documented so far, it's over 120 species of flower flies. But again, as I'm putting stuff in iNaturalist, I'm documenting species that haven't been seen in New Jersey before, so that list is constantly being added to. I've personally documented about 52 species within New Jersey through taking pictures of them and posting them onto iNaturalist. Just in the short amount of time that I've been on iNaturalist, I think just to give you a feel for how underdocumented some of these species are, I've been documenting things on iNaturalist for about 3 years now, and I think I'm somewhere within the top 10 observers within the U.S. for the number of species of flower flies. So, and that's just through gradually becoming more and more familiar with flower flies, knowing what to look for, where to find them, knowing when I see one flying around how to differentiate it. Before I even put my camera on it, I can tell you, oh, that's a flower fly, that's not a wasp or a bee. But you can, once you get good at it, you don't even need to put your camera on it. You can just tell from the behavior a lot of times, like that's not, that's a flower fly. Let's look in more closely on that and see what we have there. So what are flower flies? One of the things that a lot of them do is they hover or nectar at flowers. So in terms of the behavior, they're hovering almost like you would think a hummingbird. They're able to move forward, backwards, very maneuverable. Unlike a bee or a wasp that flies kind of erratically, these hoverflies can fly in one spot almost motionless. This makes it a lot of fun for me because with my camera a lot of times I can capture flight shots of the hoverflies because they're so motionless in the air. A lot of times you can get a shot of them and get a really nice finely detailed shot. You'll see throughout the program I'm going to be presenting a lot of my own. These are all the pictures of the adult flies that you'll see in the program are my own shots. But if you if you have even with a cell phone you can get pictures of them on flowers a lot. But if you have a nice camera and you go to manual focus, you can often get some nice shots of them in the air as they're hovering over the flowers. Unlike hummingbirds, they're not most of the time they're not hovering and nectaring at the same time. Usually when they nectar, they're going to land on the flower. But the males a lot of times will have hovering over flowers, marking or trying to attract mates or marking out their territory. The adults often feed on nectar and pollen. And one of the things that you see about them, especially you can see in this picture here of this broad-banded meadowfly, they mimic bees, wasps, and hornets to avoid predation. So a lot of them, this is again one of the reasons why they go overlooked. They look a lot like bees or wasps. But they're completely harmless to people. They can't sting. So you might be looking at it thinking, oh my gosh, it's a wasp. And a lot of them even sound like wasps. They have a very buzzy sound to them. They're perfectly designed to trick birds and other would-be predators into thinking that they might sting them or be something dangerous. This one in particular, the broad-banded meadowfly, you can see has longer antennae. A lot of the flower flies actually have very short antennae. I'll show you a slide in a minute where you can see some of the differences between flies, wasps, bees. But I want you to note on this one here, let's see if I can do my laser pointer here. If you note the antenna here, you can see some of the segmentation on the antenna. You can see it's segmented from like here to here. And then if you look really carefully, there's even a little fine, what looks like a little hair that comes out. That's the arista that comes out right there. You have the longer piece up here is the flagellum. But you can see some segmentation to the antenna. If you're looking at a wasp or a bumblebee or a bee, you're not going to see that, like those different segments of the antenna. So that's one of the things, even though this one has longer antenna that could trick you into thinking that it's a wasp, if you notice that segmentation of the antenna, that's very different. Also, flies have very big eyes. So if you're looking at the eyes here, very large eyes on the fly. Again, note only 2 wings. So you're not seeing a hind wing coming behind this wing here. But the color pattern is so similar to a wasp. It's very easy to be misled into thinking that might be a wasp. So here you can just see a quick graphic on bees, flies, wasps. You can see that here in the middle we have our fly. Again, typical of many of the flower flies is they have these short antennae. So very short antenna. Compare that to the wasps, which have very long antenna. Note you're not seeing those like different segmented, separated parts that I was showing you on the broad-banded meadowfly. Also, wasps tend to have very long, thin abdomens that are jointed. Over here you have a bee. You can see again usually long antenna. You can see what I was talking about with the hind wing. You see a wing, forewing here, and a hind wing. Same for the bee over here, forewing, hind wing. Whereas on the fly you only have 2 wings. So why are flower flies important? Like, what benefit do they have for people? Why should you care about flower flies? Well, to start off with, flies or Diptera are responsible for about 1/3 of pollination services, so pollinating crops. So they're very important for agriculture, flies. A lot's talked about bees, but flies actually have a huge role in pollination. And within Diptera, flower flies, or the syrphids, are the most important of the flies in terms of pollination. So much of their life cycle is tied into, as an adult, is tied into pollinating and visiting flowers. But if you look beyond crops, syrphids are so important for our native plants. So if you're somebody who enjoys native plants, a lot of these syrphids are adapted to pollinate our native plants. So there's a huge relationship between syrphids and native plants. And then if you go beyond the adults, which is really cool, the larvae are so important. They have so many roles within the ecosystem. But 1/3 of all syrphid larvae prey on aphids and scale insects. So in terms of pest control, for a lot of our crops, syrphids are also important at controlling aphids and other insects that negatively impact the crops. Or same for some of our native plants. The larvae of syrphids are predator control for pest insects. And then there's a lot of other syrphid larvae that are very important. They're saprotrophic and recycle waste essentially in the ecosystem. And we'll learn more about some of those as we go along in the program. But in terms of like waste cycling, some of these larvae really are important in breaking down waste. So it's beyond the adults, the larvae are so beneficial to our ecosystems too. So going further into some of the larvae, here you have some pictures of 2 different larvae. This one here is a white-bowed syrphid. They're found, they're not found in our area, but I only have a couple pictures of larvae that I've been able to capture. This one was out in Montana on a rose bush. This is one that so you have some that are plant feeders that might feed on stems, roots, or leaves. Some that are fungal feeders, again like saprotrophic, they're feeding on fungi. Some that are pollen feeders. But then as you go further down, you get some that are insectivores, the ones that are feeding on aphids and scales. This one here on the rose bush, that one is one that feeds on aphids. So it's going to be on rose looking for aphids essentially on the rose bush. This one down here is an unknown syrphid larvae that I found on one of my sheets under a plant. So I'm not sure which species that is, but I suspect that one is probably also an insectivore since it was on a plant. A lot of times the insectivores, the ones that are looking for aphids, will actually be on a plant. They look kind of like a small caterpillar or small slug, but they're actually, those are syrphid larvae. The larvae feeding strategies are so diverse. Some of them are predators in bees' nests. Some of them are aquatic filter feeders in ponds, puddles. Sewage recyclers. Some bore into old trees, into the heartwood of old trees. Some are bacterial filter feeders under sap runs in tree bark. And there's many species that are associated with old growth forest. So these flower flies are actually indicator species of old growth forest. But this by far I think is the coolest story of some of the larvae. These are the ant flies. This genus here is Microdon. These are two Microdon that were mating. This picture here was from right out in Scotland Run. So it's the genus Microdon. They are myrmecophiles. Does anybody know what a myrmecophile is? There we go. I heard somebody say ant lover. So a myrmecophile is an ant lover. That's a fancy scientific term for a species that has an interaction with ants. You might be familiar with ants and aphids. Aphids would be a myrmecophile. But there's lots of other species that have interactions with ants. These interactions might be positive or negative for the ants, but it's a species that interacts with ants. In the case of aphids, that's a positive interaction for the ants. The ants are gaining some nectar from the ants, or from the aphids. In the case of ant flies, it's more of a negative interaction for the ants. Microdon larvae actually feed on ant larvae and eggs, but they're really tricky. The adult flower fly lays its eggs near the entrance to the ant's mound, and these Microdon are very specific. They have specific ant species that they target, but they actually have pheromones. The larvae have pheromones that mimic the host ant species pheromones to avoid detection from the ants. So the ants will actually find that egg and will bring it back into their colony because it has the ant pheromones. And so they bring the ant into the colony, and then the larvae proceeds to feed on ant larvae and feed on ant eggs, and the whole time it's mimicking the pheromones of the ants so the ants don't destroy it. But it gets better because as an adult flower fly, it no longer has the pheromones. So how does it get out of the mound? Essentially, when the flower fly is ready to, when these Microdon flower fly are ready to pupate, they move closer to the entrance to the mound, and then they pupate early in the morning before the ants are awake. So that gives them enough time to get out of the ant mound before the ants wake up and detect it and kill it. So it's a really neat life history for this species. And there's many of these ant flower flies. Each one, again, is very specific on the hosts of which ant it targets. So a lot of times you need to figure out which ant species it's targeting to figure out the species of flower fly, or which microdon species it is. So going into some of the flower flies that you're most likely to see around here, some of the common ones. These margin calligraphers within the genus Taxomeris, they are probably one of the most abundant flies that I see here. They're very small though. And there's another one, the Eastern calligrapher, also within Taxomeris. It's also very common. The adults pollinate a wide variety of flowers. They're already out now. They come out very early in the spring. You'll see them almost through the whole summer. And the larvae feed on aphids and thrips. That's another small insect that feeds on plants. But interestingly, they're very important in pest control for lettuce production. So again, this is another species that's really beneficial to humans. Another species that I see quite a bit is this dusky winged hoverfly. Different than if we go back real quick just to the margin calligrapher, you can see the body shape on this is broad, and you can see that the wings are very clear. The dusky winged hoverfly, it tends to hover quite a bit, and this one doesn't stop as often at flowers, which makes it a little bit more challenging to get pictures of. But you can see how dark the wings are here. This is where it gets its name from, the dusky winged hoverfly. The wings are almost black with a clear patch towards the outer portion of the wing. And you can also note the abdomen is much thinner on this one than on the margined calligrapher. Again, common but small. The adults have that thin wing, or the dark wings and thin abdomen. Again, these have larvae that feed on aphid scales and mealybugs. So again, getting back to that, almost 1/3 of flower fly species, the larvae feed on insects that we view as pests for many of our plants. The larvae in this example are very important for citrus production, so production of oranges. They help control some of the pest insects on citrus plants. This is a group called the sedge sitters, the genus Platycharis. These ones, true to the picture here, are often found sitting on grasses. They're very important in pollination of grasses and sedges. There's more than 44 species just within this genus in the Northeast, so it's a very prolific species. But they're difficult to identify with just a photo. And again, many of these species are associated with sedges and feed on pollen, but you can often tell if you have one of these sedge sitters because they'll be prominently sitting on some of these grasses. And again, this is another one where the larvae feeds on aphids. This is another species that, this is a larger species of syrphid called transverse banded hoverfly. Very pretty markings on the back. Very common, especially as you move later into the season. So in the fall, on asters, goldenrod. That's a great time of year if you're just getting just getting into flower flies. They're very easy to see on some of those plants in the fall. The flower flies are active, even from early spring There's a lot of them out now already, and they'll kind of continue to come out. They have different species have different times of the year when you're most likely to see them, but you'll see them well through the fall. But in terms of like if you're just starting to get interested in flower flies, like the fall when goldenrod and aster are out is such an easy time to just pick a patch of goldenrod or aster, and you might have several different species that you can observe on one patch of flowers. In this case, the transverse banded hoverfly, the larvae are also called rat-tailed maggots. I'll show you a picture of what a rat-tailed maggot looks like. The larvae are aquatic. So this is quite different than the larvae we've been talking about, which feed on aphids. These larvae have a rat tail, which is essentially it's a long snorkel-like appendage, which helps them to live in really oxygen poor environments. So they can live in mud or muck or areas where there's not a lot of oxygen, like sewage or stagnant pools, because they have this long snorkel that they can use to breathe through. So this ugly-looking thing is a rat-tailed maggot. So here you can see the snorkel-like appendage. This is its breathing tube that it can use. So it can hide out in the mud and have a snorkel that comes up and still be able to breathe. This is a very common strategy within the flower flies and there's a lot of species that have this strategy that live in muck and mud and again they're very important in breaking down some of that material, some of that waste material.
How big is that?
It's small. This is blown up, and this is not my picture, but these are very small. Maybe this size. Very small larvae. If you do like aquatic sampling and you were going into the mud to get samples, you would probably pull these up in some of our local ponds, or I think one of the common terms for these, I think actually fishermen use these as bait, and they call them mousies because of the long tail. Apparently they're very attractive. I think I was reading like ice fishermen use these as bait, and they're very attractive for like perch and some other fish because they wiggle the tail-like appendage, and that I had no idea before I started looking at stuff for the presentation. I was like, I never knew that would be fish bait. This is a Eurasian dronefly. Can anybody guess which species the Eurasian dronefly is mimicking? Look familiar to anybody? So this Eurasian dronefly it's an introduced species from Europe, but it mimics honeybee. So another species from Europe. The western honeybees are a European species, and so the Eurasian dronefly. There's also another type of dronefly that we have that mimic honeybee. They also have the strategy, the rat-tailed strategy, where they live submerged in water or mud. This is a species. Common name is lily-loving thick-legged fly, or Tropidia calcarata. They're in the genus Tropidia. They're a wetland species that specializes on water lilies. The adults nectar on newfar, or common names spatterdock, or yellow pond lily that we have in a lot of our ponds around here. You can see a picture of the adult here. Down here you have the yellow pond lily, the flower, just starting to come up. And inside the flower right there you see a little, it's hard to see, but that's a fly inside pollinating that's one of the Tropidia calcarata flies in there pollinating. The larvae feed. The larvae are actually depend on the nufer, the lilies, because they feed on the rotting roots of those lilies. And what's interesting about this species is that when we were doing the BioBlitz in May of 2021, the Big Year Eco Challenge, I documented the species in series, and this was the first time this species had ever been documented on iNaturalist. And I had pictures of the adult, and I had pictures of the adult pollinating the lily. So since then, there's been one other observation that's been added to iNaturalist, but that's it. There's two of them up on iNaturalist. Within that same genus is the yellow the yellow-thighed thick-leg. It was more difficult to see on the last one, but one of the characteristics of this Tropidia genus is this giant metafemur here. It gives them like a kind of a Popeye look to their legs. It's that enlarged metafemur. So all of the Tropidia have that characteristically large leg. Again, just like the last fly, the larvae of this fly feed on rotting organic matter in wet environments. Then we get into, this is a really neat mimic of wasps. This is the eastern hornet fly. Here you can see one of the goldenrods. These ones will be out later in the summer. The adult coloration pattern mimics wasps. Pollinator of goldenrod and aster. And the larvae of this one is found in rotting cavities, in rotting tree cavities. So a little bit different. This is our largest syrphid in New Jersey, the Virginia giant hoverfly. These are actually almost bumblebee size. So some of the flies I've been talking about are smaller. This one, when it comes near, has a very loud, buzzy sound to it. You would think it was a bumblebee until you notice again, if you look at the antenna, very small antenna. So the antennae are quite different. Even though it has that loud, buzzy sound, and you're thinking like, oh gosh, that's a huge bee. It's actually our largest flower fly. The adult mimics the queens of the southern yellow jacket. Very large and loud. And this one again, the larvae are found within decaying heartwood of deciduous trees. This is a really, I've only seen this one once. This was in tall pines. Orangeback. They're in the genus Pterolastes. There's only 4 species of this genus in the entire world. There's 2 in China, 1 in Japan, and 1 in Eastern North America. This is the species that we have in Eastern North America. What's interesting about this picture, you see the legs out, splayed out like this in front of it. A lot of species of flower flies, since they have the short, again you see the very short antennae here, but they're trying to mimic wasps. They'll stick their feet out in front of them like this to make it look like they have long antennae. So they're all about tricking things into thinking they're wasps. So some of the behavior that they'll use when they're sitting on a plant is, you can't see it in the photo, but sometimes they'll waggle those legs around just like a wasp would move its antenna around. This species is an important pollinator for viburnum and goldenrod. Again, you can see the front legs are raised to mimic wasp antenna, and for this species, the larvae are completely unknown. So again, like we go back to, there's just not a lot known about some of these flower flies. So here you have a species where we only have 1 species in the U.S., but nothing is known about the larva. So we don't even know where the larvae live. This species here is a common lagoon fly. You notice right off the bat the eyes. They're very speckled. Some flower flies, this species and the next species that I'll show you, have very interesting eye patterns. So the adult has this distinctive spotted eyes. This is another species that's introduced from Europe, so it's not native to the US. But the larvae are very important in decomposing waste in sewage ponds. And again, I've only seen this species once. I believe this was in Stone Harbor down near the beach. This is another one of my favorite eye patterns. If you look at this one, this is the wavy mucksucker. I've only seen this one once, and this was in tall pines. But the eyes look like a child almost doodled all over it, like, just kind of took a pen and was like doodling on the eyes. So a really distinctive, neat eye pattern. The larvae inhabit forested wetlands, marshes, bogs. And again, they're another one where, true to their name, mucksucker, the larvae are living kind of in the mud and helping to decompose. Here you have a short-haired leaf walker. This one was in, if you're familiar with Willow Grove Preserve, that's the only spot I've seen these, was down Willow Grove Preserve, down near like Franklinville area. So this species is interesting because it's natively found within Eurasia and North America. But within Europe, within Western Europe anyway, it's experienced a rapid decline recently, and it's almost been completely extirpated from Western Europe. They don't really know why. But again, it just kind of goes to show, from what I've read, there's more that's known about the conservation status for some of these species within Europe than there is for the US. So there's less known here about conservation status for a lot of these species. So there's still a lot that we have to learn about these flies. So it's interesting that this one hasn't declined here in the US, but we don't really know why. But it's found in old growth spruce forest or old growth pine forest. So you can see in this picture that area of Willow Grove has a lot of nice old pines. It's actually a really neat area for dragonflies as well. I find it kind of interesting that species of flower fly I found within that area. The larvae actually inhabit sappy hollows beneath pine bark. So again, that's a very different strategy from some of the strategies we've talked about for the larvae so far, using pine and being underneath the bark. This is a bare-eyed mimic fly. You can see the resemblance to bumblebee with this fly. So this is a fly that's going to mimic bumblebee as part of its strategy. This one is associated with mature hardwood forests. And the larvae are filter feeders within water-filled tree cavities. So again, very, very specific environment for the larvae. So you might be wondering now, after seeing all these flower flies, where would you go to look for flower flies? This is another. This is the eastern hornet fly. I showed you a picture a little while earlier, but I had to throw another one in here so that you could see the eyes better, because the eyes are just so cool on this species. So if you were to go looking for flower flies, forest openings, forest edges, you've probably noticed as the presentation has gone on in terms of talking about the larvae, wetlands are very important. One of the places where flower flies are the least common is very arid areas where it's very dry. But pretty much if you're near wetlands, you have a better chance of finding the flower flies. But forest openings and forest edges where there's some sunlight, you're often going to see the adults where there's some sunlight. I've had a lot of success finding flower flies, as I've mentioned, in the fall on asters and goldenrod. If you, in particular, some of the places where I've seen them the best in the fall, if you go down to Cape May to like Higbee Beach down there with all those fields down there's some big fields down there with lots of aster and goldenrod. There is just flower flies buzzing all over the place in there. So if you're going down there to look for warblers, check out the flowers down there because they're just loaded with flower fly species in the fall. It's really amazing to see. Wet meadows, prairies, and savannas with native plants are supposed to be among some of the best places for flower flies. Unfortunately, those are some of the areas, as many of us know, for birds. Those areas are fewer and farther between these days. That's one of the most imperiled habitats. So it's harder to find flower flies away from some of those areas. The other interesting thing that I was learning about as I was preparing for this presentation was a behavior called hilltopping. And essentially some of the flower fly species, particularly those that are where they might be a little bit rarer or more spread out, the males will actually move to kind of higher ground to be more prominent while they're displaying. So if there's a small rise in the area, a small hill, they might be displaying from the top of that hill. Or if there's a man-made structure in that area that gives them a little bit of extra height. So you might see them they might be on the side of your house, or they might be, once I learned about this, I started thinking about it, and I've seen them kind of on utility poles sometimes in power lines, but something that gives them a little bit of extra height to display for females. So you might look for them to be doing this hilltopping behavior where they're slightly higher to give them a little bit more prominence as they're displaying for females. If you're interested in learning more about flower flies, there's some really cool resources out there. Once I started to get interested in flower flies, I picked up this book. You can see there's a graphic for the book there. The Field Guide to Flower Flies of Northeastern North America by Skevington and Locke. This has all 400 plus species that are found in Northeastern North America in it. And there's some nice information in here. The pictures are really well done, and it provides you with a bunch of information about how to identify. And beyond that, if you have a camera, if you can post pictures to iNaturalist, that's a really nice way. There's some really great people on iNaturalist. There's a really nice group of people that help identify flower fly photos that go onto iNaturalist. They're one of the, in terms of posting things to iNaturalist, that group of people is one of the best groups at identifying things quickly usually. So if your picture is of decent quality, it'll probably get identified, at least to genus, by those people that are helping do the identifications on there. And that's how I've learned a lot about some of the flower fly species is through those people. Also, bugguide.net is a good resource online too. iNaturalist and Bugguide are both free resources online to help learn more. And that's it. Anybody have any questions? Go ahead, Dan.
Well, first of all, awesome stuff. Really cool. And love the pictures. I had no idea, this is going to sound really dumb, but as a professional entomologist, I didn't know there were common names for almost any of these things. Are there common names for all 400 of them?
Well, so part of that is probably from the guy here.
Okay. So they just made them up.
I think they added common names for a lot of species that didn't have common names.
Yeah, that's what they must have just made them up.
To make them more appealing to beginners getting into fireflies. I'm trying to see when this book. I know this book is recent. 2019.
Okay, yeah.
So it's probably fair.
Because when I used to identify flower flies for Rutgers University, there were no names like any of these.
Yeah.
They were all just,
Yeah.
taxonomous,
Yeah, I think it's a combination of that guide and iNaturalist.
Okay.
That's
cool. I mean, I love, some of those names are really cool.
Yeah.
Funny.
Yeah, I thought it was funny, like when we, initially when we found Tropedia calcarata, in iNaturalist it was Tropedia calcarata, but I went to the guide, and I was looking at it and I was like, lily-loving pondfly. And I was like, it was on a lily, like, I was like, the name's pretty good. But then they switched it over to lily-loving pondfly on iNaturalist, like, at some point after that. So,
Yeah. Okay, cool.
so yeah, I think they kind of, between iNaturalist and the guide, I think it's maybe gaining some traction.
Okay.
I like using the common names just because for audiences,
Sure.
it sounds a little bit, it's easier to understand.
It's easier to remember orange back.
Yeah, orange back. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You can't beat Mucksucker.
Yeah, and wait, there's some good names. Yeah.
Yeah, some of them are hilarious. Some of the names are bigger than insects.
Definitely. Some of the letters might be bigger than these.
Did you take most of those photos?
Yes, all except for the rat-tailed maggot. Everything else was mine. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's again, it's a beautiful group of insects with a lot of different adaptations. I would have shown you, I probably showed you about 20 species or so that I've seen, but again, I've identified 52 just within New Jersey, so there's a lot more, a lot of different color patterns. If you're into warblers, I think these are kind of like the warblers of the fly world to me. There's a lot of neat color patterns. They're small, they're quick, and they move around. But they do, like I said, some of them do hover and sit still for a while. Some of them you can catch on the flowers when they're sitting nice and still. So once you get more familiar with the behavior and start to recognize like the flight patterns, you really start to cue in on that you have a flower fly instead of something else, and then you start looking.
Is the hovering behavior strictly males trying to attract females, or what other?
It can be, but they're also, as they're moving from flower to flower, a lot of times they're hovering as well. So as they're pollinating flowers, you'll see them kind of like move around, and they have a different flight style than some of the other insects.
Slowly hovering, trying to figure out which flower.
Yes, it's slow and deliberate, whereas a lot of the other insects are kind of like a wavy, like indirect pattern, but quick, so you can't. With flower flies, sometimes they're so slow that they're just like kind of like in one spot, and you can get a really good. If you had a pair of binoculars, you could get a good look at it, the patterns on the back while it was doing that.
Are they the same size as the insects they imitate?
Yeah, a lot of the mimics tend to be like, so if you're looking at like a bumblebee mimic, it's going to be a larger fly, or if you're looking at, and some of them, like maybe like the Toxomeris genus, the small ones, the calligraphers that I was showing you in the beginning, there's a lot of flower flies that they consider just kind of like general mimics, like they're not mimicking a specific wasp, or some of them are very specific, like they might be, there's one that looks almost exactly like a bald-faced hornet. So if you're familiar with bald-faced hornet, there's one that looks like a bald-faced hornet, or as I mentioned, like the Virginia giant is going to mimic the southern yellow jacket queen. Or the bumblebee mimic is definitely mimicking a bumblebee. But then there's others that just kind of have a general pattern that they believe gives it enough of a general pattern that it gives it some sort of predator avoidance through that general pattern.
Is the field guide show plant associations with particular species?
Yeah, it does. I think it, like, again, like you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt because it's because they are understudied. I'm not sure that it has like every single species that those flies might associate with. Some of them are more generalist, and you might see them on different plants, but it does list within the field guide like which plants they know of that those species pollinate. Yes.
When you describe them as some very small and then some apparently are larger,
Yes.
it's hard to tell from your pictures.
Yes.
What, can you give a range of size? Like, what are the very small ones? Like quarter inch, eighth inch?
So-
Or, you know, or some maybe 3/4 inch or?
Yeah,
you know, what's a size range?
It is a range. I would say there's some, if you're familiar with like housefly size, there's some that are maybe like when we were talking about the calligraphers, I would say they're maybe like a third the size of a housefly, so they're small. They're a very small fly. Whereas when you work your way into some of the larger ones, you might be working up to like the size of a bumblebee. So,
Okay.
so like the giant, the Virginia giant, that one is going to be large, like bumblebee size. But that's about as big as you're going to get for flower
So you're
flies.
talking really small.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of them. There is a lot of small ones, but then there's a lot within that kind of medium range. So somewhere between like maybe like bigger than a housefly, but smaller than a bumblebee. So things that you would definitely notice as you were, if you went to say like Cape May and were walking around in the flowers down there in the field, you would notice them because they're fairly large.
Do they have in the, you know, the way they sometimes target, like the story of the one that goes into the anthill, the Trojan anthill horse guy?
Yes.
Do they also have predators that are specific to the species, like certain types of birds that will eat certain ones, or just generally?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's if there's certain predators that target flower flies or
certain
not.
ones? Interesting.
Do you know anything about that, Darren? He was asking if it's known if there's any predators that target flower flies specifically. If there's like birds that specifically target flower flies.
I would kind of doubt that there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that, but yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of what they do is kind of designed to avoid being
Yeah.
easily detectable by predators. So,
Very cool.
any other questions?
Yeah, how did you know that the larva that you did find in the leaf wasn't in some other caterpillar thing? What made you check it out more?
Because I've seen a few of the larvae before. And I've seen pictures as well, and in comparing it to other flower flies, other flower fly larvae. I know that it's a flower fly larvae, but it's hard to identify some of the larvae to species. So the best I could do is call that one a flower fly larvae. All right. Well, thank you all very much for coming.